I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's talk about a BBC interview by Malcolm Turnbull, who used to be the Australian Prime Minister, taking aim at two other Australian Prime Ministers, the person that he succeeded and the person that is now in the job that took over from him. And of course, all of this fighting between these prime ministers, both present and former, revolve around the fires in Australia. And Alexander, the title of the article via the BBC and the interview was Australia Fires. Malcolm Turnbull accuses Scott Morrison of misleading the nation. And Morrison made the unfortunate decision during the fires to take a holiday in the US, which really left him exposed to a lot of criticism. And it looks like Turnball is going to take advantage of that. And he has been taking advantage of that. And he has been criticizing him and the way that he has handled the fires in Australia. So you see a lot of political infighting. It really does remind me of the fighting that took place to the run-up of the elections in the UK between the Blairites and the Corbyn factions of the Labour Party. In this case, though, we have the Liberals in Australia, who are actually more of a conservative right party, if I'm not mistaken, or at least a center right party. So, Alexander, get into what you think is going on here in Australia. Is this a power kind of struggle that's taking place? Each politician trying to gain some points out of this tragedy in Australia?
Yes, it is a power struggle, and can I just say that those who follow Australian politics closely will know that power struggles of this kind are extremely common in Australia. Australian politics have never been very stable in terms of the personalities who lead political parties and governments there. Coups within the two dominant parties, the Liberals and the Labour Party, are extremely common. In fact, it's actually unusual for governments or prime ministers, or it seems unusual sometimes for prime ministers to lose office as a result of something as simple as being defeated in an election. There's always factions within parties that are fighting each other, and very often those factions manage to oust or successfully oust the incumbent leader, and you have someone else taking their place. Turnbull himself has something of a history of this sort of thing. And of course, he was the victim of that kind of coup. And now he's coming back. He's preparing to launch a coup against the incumbent prime minister, who he quite correctly, I think, says has massively mishandled the problem of the wildfires in Australia. I don't think there's any, I personally am of that clear view. When you have a catastrophe of this kind, the very last thing you want to do is take a holiday in America. You are there at the forefront of fighting the fires. You're on the phone, you're meeting all the fire people, you are coordinating, you are visible, you are seen to be doing everything you possibly can to combat those fires. Scott Morrison has been complacent. He's been often invisible or far less visible than he should. And he has exposed himself to this kind of attack by Malcolm Turnbull. Now, I just want to also say something about Malcolm Turnbull. Malcolm Turnbull is a very well-known Australian politician in Britain. And the reason is that way back in the 1980s, when he was a lawyer, he was a practicing lawyer, he became involved in a legal battle in Australia over the publication of a book called Spycatcher, which was written by a former MI5 officer, which exposed many of the stories about the incompetence and the mismanagement of things within MI5 in the immediate Cold War period, just after the Second World War. And this book was an enormous scandal. The British authorities tried to stop its publication. They succeeded in having it stopped in Britain. Then there was an attempt to publish it in Australia. There was an attempt by the British government to stop it being published in Australia. Malcolm Turnbull acted for the publishers, and he won a runaway legal victory, and it was published in Australia. So that made him a very well-known figure in Britain. And it actually, strangely enough, despite the fact that he took on the establishment and won, it actually won him a lot of, respect in Britain too. So he's well known, and the fact that he's giving an interview like this to the BBC, which is of course the British state broadcaster, is also a sign that he's trying to whip up support in Britain. And as we've discussed in previous programs, though Australia is independent of Britain completely, the British and Australian political establishments are greatly intertwined. And of course, Australia and Britain share the same head of state, who is the Queen. The Queen of Britain is also the Queen of Australia. So this is a power play. Malcolm Turnbull, who's an extremely clever man, is making some very, very pertinent criticisms of Scott Morrison. He clearly wants to come back. That's my interpretation. People in Australia want to disagree with it. They're welcome to, but that's how it looks to me. He's, joining up all the dots. He's lining up, as we say in Britain, all the ducks. He's going to all the various important people in Britain who he wants their support when he makes his bid in Australia. And of course, the criticisms he's making of Scott Morrison are absolutely right. That's my view.
Right, and he's aligning himself as the climate change guy. Absolutely. And he's positioning Morrison, and I'm going to read you another excerpt from the interview. Tony Abbott as well, a former prime minister. He's positioning these guys as the climate change deniers. So Turnbull is very clever as to how he's capitalizing on this tragedy. Here's a quote from the interview as well, and an excerpt from the BBC article. As the fires have raged, so has the debate about climate change and its part in Australia's destructive summer. Mr. Turnbull took aim at former colleagues in the governing Liberal Party, accusing another ex-Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, of being, and I quote, probably the most prominent climate denier in Australian politics, but there are plenty of others who were engaged in a war against science. Quote, it's an extraordinarily irrational and self-destructive approach, Mr. Turnbull said. So he's positioning himself as the climate change guy, potentially the climate change candidate.
Yes.
And he's automatically taking all his challengers and moving them in a position of climate change deniers. What do you make of this strategy?
Well, it's probably a clever strategy at the moment in Australia, given the way a lot of people are linking the fires to climate change issues, and to the fact that the current Australian government, both Scott Morrison and Tony Abbott, who are, by the way, more to the right than Malcolm Turnbull. I think one point I would make, and this isn't new. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull has always been the more sort of, liberal end of the Liberal Party, which, as you rightly say, in Australia is the Conservative Party. It's all very confusing, but these are historic names. The left-wing party in Australia is the Labour Party. So the Liberals are the conservative, monarchist, pro-Atlanticist party. The Labour Party has had, its more Republican history background, and it's fairly closely connected in some ways to the British Labour Party. But Turnbull is on the left, within the spectrum of the Liberal Party. He's on its left. Abbott and Morrison are on its right. He senses that they are in a weak position because, as I say, Morrison's response to the fires has not been good, and climate change in place of, say, immigration, which is what Abbott and Morrison had, played up before. Climate change is now rising in relevance because of the fires, and Malcolm Turnbull is very, very astutely maneuvering to take advantage of that.
All right. Also in the interview, Alexander, Turnbull took some shots at Trump, U.S. President Trump. Now, everyone knows that Australia is part of the Five Eyes. as well as having a very close relationship, a brotherly relationship with the UK. They have a very, very close relationship with the United States. Abbott and Morrison have actually taken positions to be very close to US President Trump. I know definitely Abbott, definitely Morrison has. But Turnbull seems to be taking a more antagonistic position against Trump. Here's what he said during the interview. Trump is playing a very destructive role in terms of climate action. Trump makes no bones about it. He says global warming is rubbish, Mr. Turnbull said. Trump is lying to put a brake on global action to reduce emissions. The lack of American leadership is extremely damaging. Close out the video. What do you make of Turnbull's decision to go and antagonize US President Trump?
Well, I mean, if he becomes Prime Minister of Australia again, then of course he will have to find ways of accommodating Donald Trump, who will, despite the impeachment that we're all absorbed with, remain the President of the United States. So he will have to find a way of adjusting to that. But I said that Turnbull is on the left of the Liberal Party. His alignments are more with people like, well, to say it frankly, people more like Hillary Clinton, ultimately, than with Donald Trump. So that's completely unsurprising.
Would you say Turnbull is more of a neoliberal?
Yes.
Maybe definitely. A Blairite more or not?
Well, he's certainly more of a centrist. Definitely more of a centrist, I'd say, than Abbott and Morrison are. But I would say something else about Australian politics, which is that Australia tends to be rather governed from what you might call the neoliberal centre. It's not a country where there are very, very big geopolitical divisions on the way the world is perceived. There is a very, very articulate left in Australia. There is certainly a right in Australia also. But when you look at who governs Australia, it always seems to converge on the centre. And it tends to be very pro the US. Its connections with the US are very strong, and the British political establishment obviously has very strong links with the one in Australia, and the two are very, very closely interconnected. So Turnbull is on the left of the Liberal Party, and he would be much more comfortable, I think, with a Joe Biden as President of the United States if he ever became Prime Minister of Australia than he would be with a re-elected Donald Trump. But that's my take on Australian politics. If people want to discuss, especially people from Australia want to talk about all of this and discuss what goes on in Australia, they're very welcome to, and we would be very interested in their comments on our thread, and we would take note of it.
Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below, click on the notifications bell, and make sure to smash that like button. Donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar as well. Your donation really helps us out a lot. And look for us on Soundcloud and iTunes to get an audio copy of this video. And also check us out on the Duran shop. Pick up some magic mugs and some merchandise. Alexander, the Duran shop.
Indeed, so we have our wonderful Duran mugs, which are of such high quality. As I said, we set out to find the best possible mugs to supply to our viewers. And these are really superb mugs. They are beautifully made. They are solid. They are beautiful porcelain. They're light. They're strong. They're elegant. They keep your tea or coffee or hot chocolate warm. They keep your beer or your champagne, as I once drunk from one of my mugs. They keep it cold, and they are a joy to have. And this one is my oldest mug. It's got the emblem of the Duran, which is the double-headed eagle. You can see it there, which hovers over the world and looks to the east and the west, as we try to do. And you can see that it's in perfect condition. You can see how there is not a chip or a break or scratch or any sign of discoloration there at all, because despite my very heavy use, it is a superb and well-made mug. And I would say the same is true of all our other products. Our shirts are 100% cotton. They're beautifully made. They're beautifully stitched together. They're incredibly comfortable to wear. The one I'm wearing now is one of our famous and very elegant and extremely smart Duran polo shirts. You can see it's also got the double-headed eagle of the Duran. And we've also got, obviously, our T-shirts, both long-sleeved and short-sleeved, and our V-neck shirts. We've got hoodies and hats and stickers. So you can find all these things on our shop. You support the Duran by buying these products from our shop. So, that helps us to keep going. So both for your own sake, so that you can own these great things, and for the sake of the Duran, come to our shop, buy these great things, and Alex will tell you how.
Just look at the description box down below. You'll find a link to the DuranShop.com. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.